Welcome to The Green Rush, a podcast about the business of cannabis. On a weekly basis, hosts Ann Donahoe and Louis Goldberg talk with the CEOs, politicians, and cultural icons driving the cannabis industry forward. This is another Louis-only episode, though don't worry, Ann will be back next week. Today, Louis speaks with Joe Lusardi, CEO of Curaleaf. If you're not familiar with Curaleaf, you are in for a treat. The company just completed the largest RTO, or reverse takeover, in the history of U.S. cannabis companies. Curaleaf raised more money at a higher valuation than anyone in marijuana history. Joe's been involved in the business for a long time, and his stories, along with those of Curaleaf, are fascinating. But before we get to the interview with Joe, we talked with industry reporter and writer Javier Hasse. So don't sit back, lean forward. And now, on to some news, and then our interview with Curaleaf CEO, Joe Lusardi.
So Javier,
yeah.
What is the biggest story, or what is the biggest thing that we're all missing that we should all be paying attention to?
Well, there's a few things. It's hard to pick just one. One of my favorite stories from last week was a poll that came out of Gallup. And take into account, this is not a poll conducted by a liberal media outlet or a pro-cannabis lobbying group. This is, a very well-known, very well-respected polling agency that has been around for decades. And their latest poll showed that 66% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. And even a majority of Republicans, are now supporting marijuana legalization, with 53% of respondents who declared to be Republicans supporting legalizing cannabis. So, it's going mainstream by the minute. Another very interesting thing that I'm seeing, and again, proves that cannabis is going mainstream at an accelerated pace, is related to capital markets, right? One of my favorite data sets is Viridian Capital Advisors' Cannabis Deal Tracker. What they do is track basically every deal. And as of October 19 actually, they had tracked $7.6 billion in investments into cannabis companies. And this does not even consider the $4 billion that Constellation Brands, the maker of Corona, will be making into canopy growth, because it was not yet, finalized. It is expected before the end of the year. It was not finalized yet. But even without those $4 billion, we've seen $7.6 billion invested into the cannabis industry this year, and this compares to less than $2 billion over the same period last year. So, the growth is exponential, and you can see it in recent transactions, right? Like Iance's recent acquisition of MPX for like $640 million, MedMen's acquisition of Pharmagen for $680 million. The fact that like Verano Holdings last week raised $120 million, and it's a company that most of us have never even heard about. And of course, the biggest story in relation to capital markets and cannabis going mainstream is that of big cannabis companies making a debut in huge stock exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange. Aurora just finished its first week of trading. Aphria is scheduled to debut on the New York Stock Exchange on November 2nd. Curaleaf debut in Canada on Monday with a $4 billion valuation. It's, the numbers have become astounding, something that most people would have never even imagined a couple of years ago, right? And there's a lot I cannot say, of course, but expect at least 5 or 6 more big IPOs coming before the end of the year. Some of them are known, like Acreage Holdings. Some others are not of public knowledge yet. But if you pay enough attention to the industry and look at the bigger players, expect most of the big companies going public sometime in the next couple of months, I'd say. And those who haven't, next year, probably most of them will. I mean, it's one of the best ways to raise cash right now with valuations going crazy. Many of them not even based in fundamentals, just, people speculating on the potential of the industry or on the fact that, many of these companies could become acquisition targets. Even the largest companies, the ones valued at $4 billion, $10 billion, are still acquisition targets. It's not like another cannabis company will come in and buy it, probably, who knows. But there's definitely interest from players from outside the industry. Call it Coca-Cola, call it, Altria, the maker of Marlboro, right? Or call it Constellation Brands. Those to me are the biggest trends this week. A lot of people are talking about cannabis-infused beverages. I think it does have big market potential. I am not so much of a products guy, but I do see the financial potential of this play. And, of course, it was largely what motivated Constellation's this big investment into Canopy.
So, Joe, congratulations.
Thank you.
You just completed what looks like the largest raise in U.S. cannabis history, a $400 million RTO on the Canadian Stock Exchange, which is equivalent to about $520 million Canadian. Tell us about what the process was like to raise all that money.
It was very challenging, to say the least. It requires a tremendous amount of work from a lot of talented people, including lawyers and accountants. And so there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to create disclosures and do all the legal work. And then, we did a 3-week roadshow where we bounced around the globe and met with some of the most sophisticated investors in the world to tell our story. And, the good news for our company is we got a great reception, and I think people had a level of sophistication around the topic that allowed them to make an investment in the company. So, we're certainly humbled and pleased by the reception and intend to create a lot of value with that capital.
So you're the CEO.
I am.
You are.
Yeah.
You are the CEO
Yeah.
Of Curaleaf. And up until recently, you have relatively been somewhat of a stealth company. Can you talk about what Curaleaf is? What differentiates you from other companies? What is Curaleaf?
Curaleaf today is a vertical cannabis operator. We're operational in 10 states, primarily on the East Coast, although we have extended our brand into the West Coast, and we'll continue to do so through acquisitions this year and next. And we have a footprint on the East Coast from Maine all the way down to Florida. We operate the largest retail network under one brand, Curaleaf, which is the Curaleaf brand. And we're vertical. And so what that means is that we cultivate, manufacture our own products and dispense them in the states in which we operate. In most instances, particularly by law in Florida and New Jersey, for example, we only sell Curaleaf products. So if you walk into a Curaleaf store, you'll find over 250 SKUs of different products. And those range from flower to vaporizers to topicals and tinctures and oral formulations. So it's a complete offering of cannabis-derived products.
And you've been in the cannabis industry for a long time?
Yeah, I started in 2009. So Maine passed a medical marijuana bill in 2009, and friends of mine got the crazy idea that we should look at this industry. And I would say I'm a reluctant cannabis pioneer. I never imagined I'd be running a marijuana company, but it's been an amazing journey. And the thing that I've learned over the last decade being in the space almost is that there's a tremendous amount of support for cannabis, and literally millions of people around the country are using cannabis to treat sometimes some very serious, debilitating diseases. And so, it's a huge responsibility to operate a cannabis company. We had 33,000 unique patients serviced through our stores last month. And so that's something I'm, very proud of. And it's a mandate I take very seriously to, deliver cannabis to some truly sick people.
So you're a pioneer, right? I mean, you said it.
Yeah,
and I can see you with like the suspenders and the big hat, except you went east as opposed to going west. So what was Maine like? What was the cannabis Maine culture like in 2009, 2010 when you were just starting up?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting in that Maine had Maine was fairly progressive on the topic, although it's a small state and under the radar. So Maine had a caregiver law for about a decade prior to putting a full dispensary law into place. And so, Maine had a culture of, Mainers supporting their neighbors and, growing cannabis on a very small scale to help people that were seriously ill. I mean, these are some of the most vulnerable people in our society that are using cannabis to treat diseases like cancer and epilepsy and, MS. And so this is a state that had a bit of a culture of marijuana, and in 2009 they passed a bill so they could create a dispensary network to create greater access for cannabis. And so that's when we stepped in, and to be candid, we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, I wrote a business plan based off the internet, and we won a license. We never thought we'd win a license, and then I reluctantly agreed to help finance it. And before you know it, we were running a cannabis company.
When you were looking for marijuana,
there wasn't a lot of
plan,
information. There wasn't a lot of information. Honestly, it was all out of California, right? So California was very progressive on the topic as well, but only this year does California have a state regulated regime. So California, it was all local entrepreneurs and enthusiasts that were creating the industry. And so that's where a lot of the innovation was happening. And we in fact went out to California, studied the topic, and tried to implement what were the best practices at the time. I mean, looking back a decade, what we did was fairly archaic, barbaric to a degree, but no one knew any better. We just did what we could do to make the business go.
So now you're the CEO of a public company, and you've never been the CEO of a public company before. As you were going through the process, and you talked a little bit about the raising of the $400 million, but was there something that you learned that really kind of woke you up and said, oh, this is what it means to be the steward of this much money, or to be a public CEO? Like, what was that process like?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a huge responsibility. As you said, Curaleaf was, I don't want to say in stealth mode, but we were a private company. We were capitalized. And so we were able to, go about doing our business without the responsibility of having to make public disclosures and be under a microscope. So I think that, certainly my role is going to change. And it's a big responsibility, as you point out, to, have that amount of money and put that to work responsibly and to create shareholder value. So that's what we intend to do. But, I think that from the RTO perspective, it was the fastest way to get to the capital markets, and it allowed us to go tell our story and take in money that will allow us to create value and extend our business into other states that we find attractive. We will put to work about $80 million over the next 12 to 14 months into our own organic growth, and that's infrastructure building, cultivation centers, manufacturing, more retail locations, and then the rest of that money we're going to put to work into accretive M&A. So we've got a pretty full M&A pipeline. The environment for M&A is still quite good. This industry is very fragmented, and so state by state, you have entrepreneurs starting businesses that will never achieve the scale of Curaleaf, and so a lot of times it's logical for them to fold their operations into a bigger enterprise. And so that's what we intend to do, is get out on the road and make acquisitions that are creative and create value.
So back in 2009, you guys were starting this up in Maine. And there are a lot of people who are listening to you right now, listening to me, thinking, I want to get into the cannabis industry. Is it too late for somebody to get in? I mean, is the costs too high, or is there still opportunity?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's too late. These are, in my opinion, still early days of cannabis. If you think about, industry estimates, ArcView, for example, projects the industry to be a $75 billion industry, and only $11 billion of that is regulated today. So there's a lot of headroom between 11 and 75 billion for people to get into the space. And, there's 31 states that now have medical marijuana programs, but certainly there's more states to come, and, adult use will unfold over the next couple of years. So no, it's not too late to get in, but, certainly the level of sophistication of the operators is increasing every day. And I think that, you have to recognize that having scale will be important to create a national brand. And so I think that, like most industries, over, an intermediate time horizon, 3 to 5 years, the bigger, multi-state operators will likely, I don't want to say dominate the space, but be.
Yeah, I mean it'll be like the Barnes and Nobles versus the independent booksellers, right? You'll have the big chains that are out there that everybody's going to know, and they're going to trust Curaleaf from a retail perspective. They're going to trust the product, but they may also go to their local dispensary because they have a unique brand or a unique strain that they want to try. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, another analogy could be alcohol or beer, for example. So you could have, mass market brands, and then you might have, craft breweries, right? And you could have craft, and you likely will have craft cannabis. We've already seen that. So you have a lot of boutique growers that are growing some really high quality cannabis. And I think that's certainly a segment of the market that will continue. So, this is a big industry, and there's a lot of space in it for a lot of people to participate in. So, I think that should be, we certainly I wouldn't dissuade anybody from jumping in. It's still early days for sure.
Would you dissuade them from going public? I mean, was the experience of taking this company public painful, or would you do it again?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, look, being public is not for everybody. It's just a huge responsibility, and it comes with a lot of pros and cons. And so it's something that we take very seriously. And I think you have to really make sure you know what you're getting into. It's an awesome responsibility to take money from over 100 institutions, some of the biggest money managers in the world, investing in Curaleaf. And so that's a big responsibility. And that's as I say, not for everybody. And
you have to report your first quarter soon. So
we do.
That's going to be a unique experience for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, from my perspective, what I think that folks will see from Curaleaf over time is that this is a business that was founded on being operationally excellent. And so I think that quarter over quarter, we're going to demonstrate that this is a business that has solid revenue, solid returns. And, I think that investors will come to recognize that this is a high quality business.
So you used to be Paliatech, and you changed the name to Curaleaf, and you did that only a couple of months ago. Why did you make the change?
Right. So first, let me explain what Paliatech was. So Paliatech was founded by a bunch of entrepreneurs that were very forward-thinking, and that they wanted to create a device where you could use cannabis in a clinical setting, in a hospital setting, and it would be meter dosing of cannabis. And so they spent a couple years.
Which is still needed.
Absolutely. Right? So they spent a couple years working on that project, but they were a little bit ahead of their time, frankly, and they never commercialized it. But in about 2012, they veered into touching the plant in New Jersey by acquiring a vertical cannabis license. And so Paliatech was a one-state operator, and about 2.5 years ago, I joined the firm as CEO. Boris Jordan, the executive chairman of the business, had financed Paliatech, and so together we developed this multi-state platform that we operate today. And just a few months back, we recognized that we had a holding company called Paliatech, and we had all our dispensaries called Curaleaf, and we thought that it made sense to align those two brands and create a lot of recognition around a single brand. And so we made the decision to become Curaleaf as an operating company as well as the holding company.
And now your ticker symbol is Cura,
right?
So it works perfectly.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And you trade on the
CSE. Yep. So we're on the Canadian Stock Exchange. We are not, because we're a U.S. touching the plant business, we cannot list in the U.S. today. We hope that as the conflict between federal and state law resolves itself, hopefully in the next coming years, we'll be able to list on the U.S. as well. But today we're up on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and that has become the exchange of choice for U.S. operators. So a number of our peers have listed on the CSE, and a few more are coming right behind us to list. And so that's the place where cannabis capital is finding operators.
So we're recording this on October 30th, and you started trading yesterday. And while I don't want to get all deeply into prices of stocks, it would be not realistic to acknowledge that since October 17th, the day that Canada, formally went adult use, there's been a huge sell-off in the cannabis stocks. We've seen 30, 40% for some shares. Why do you think this is? I mean, is there going to be a rotation from Canada to the U.S.? I mean, what's going on in the capital markets?
Well, I mean, first, this is an emerging business, right? And so there's going to be just natural volatility. This is not going to be for the faint of heart. I mean, if you're an investor in cannabis, I suggest you should be in for the long term.
Strap it in,
Yeah,
strap it on,
because
whatever
it's going to take
is.
time, and there's going to be a lot of fits and starts. I mean, we have a lot of regulatory hurdles that we have to go through in our business, and so do the Canadians. I mean, you saw that they've already run out of product in a couple of markets, and that will rectify itself. It's a new business, and progress takes time, and these things take a bit to get up and
They've
running.
tapped the keg, so to speak.
Exactly. But, I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm for cannabis investing in stocks. And I think maybe sometimes it's, irrational enthusiasm. And I
Rational
think
exuberance, right?
Right. And so it's possible the Canadian stocks were a bit overheated. I mean, those guys have a huge valuations, and they've got to deliver earnings to justify those things. So, we'll see what happens. But from our point of view, we started trading on Monday. It's our first day of trading, not our last. And so it probably wasn't the best day to go public. Our peers shed 15 to 20% of their value on the first day. So, but we think that we'll continue to deploy the capital that we've raised and create value. And so I think that in the long term, Curaleaf is going to be a great stock to own.
Me too, by the way. So you have stores in mostly limited license states: New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts. Why not pursue opener? I speak pretty, don't I? But more open states like Nevada or California or Oregon, or is that part of your strategy?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, we're an East Coast company, right? We started in Massachusetts and New Jersey, and so.
By the way, we still know how to grow pot on the East.
That's right. So part of it was a function of management focus, and we're on the East Coast, and so we really focused our attention on the East Coast first and foremost. And frankly, we find those markets to be more attractive because they are limited license in nature. There's what I would say a balance between the supply and the demand of cannabis. And so that creates stable markets. They're highly regulated, and the economics are better. If you look at markets like Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, they took a different regulatory approach, in that they were a little bit more generous in the amount of licenses that were distributed throughout the state. And I think that you've seen a compression in margins and a lot of, frankly, black market activity as a consequence. And so we've really, one of the core principles of our company is that we wanted to make sure that we operated fully in compliance with all state regulations, and that we were in markets that were highly regulated. We think that's frankly a competitive advantage. If you go into a market like New York, for example, we think it will be one of the best growth markets for cannabis in 2019, but it's highly.
Why will New York be so good?
Well, I mean, it's simple math. There's 20 million people in the state, and there's 10 operators, and cannabis is now starting to be more recognized as a valid use for medical conditions, and so there are more doctors writing more recommendations. And
but the structure of the market sucks, right? You can't get flower in New York. I mean, it's a limited form factor state.
Well, I mean, I don't see it that way. I think that first, I would say that formulated cannabis that comes in oil is certainly a really high quality product. It's in many cases more predictable, and so I think that what you've seen even in just the general cannabis space is that people are gravitating away from flower and into manufactured products. I mean, 5 years ago, 100% of the sales of cannabis were flower. Today it's 50% and shrinking. So I think people are gravitating more towards formulated products. And so from that point of view, I think that New York is on trend, and I think that it's really not that much of a limiting factor.
But New Jersey's the other side, right? I mean, New Jersey's only flower state.
Well, New Jersey started their program, about 2012, right? And so those were different days. But, just a couple of months ago, New Jersey, for the first time, authorized the company Curaleaf to sell vapor pens, and it's already close to 40% of our sales. And so I think you'll see New Jersey gravitate more towards formulated products over time as well. And our thesis for New York is that there's 20 million people here, there's 10 operators, and we think that it's a market that's ripe for growth. And so we're actually really excited about New York as a market. And the reason why I brought up New York was to illustrate that it's a great market, but it's going to take a significant amount of capital investment. I mean, we will dump more than $10-15 million million in New York this year into infrastructure to create a business. And so, that's not for everybody. This is definitely a space where you need to have at least a level of sophistication and capital to execute on a business plan.
So you have a license in New York. Where do you operate in the state?
We do. So our cultivation center and manufacturing is up by Albany and Ravenna, and we have 4 dispensaries, 3 which are open today. So one up in Plattsburgh, we have a dispensary in Newburgh, and a dispensary over in Queens at Forest Hills, and our 4th dispensary in Carl Place will hopefully open in November.
So I'm a Mets fan, and Queens are where the Mets play. So are I know you don't have to tell me, but are any of my players your patients?
I can't disclose that, but I'm a Red Sox fan, so maybe we should just talk about baseball, and I can gloat about the Red Sox.
You can totally gloat about the Red Sox
yet again.
So you're headquartered in Massachusetts,
We are.
And that state was supposed to have converted from a medical state to an adult use state. They passed a law. What the hell is going on? What's taking so long?
Well, cannabis is a controversial subject, and I think that
Is it?
Yeah, it is. And I think we have to recognize that when people go to the ballot box and they vote for something, it sounds like a great idea. So they go and say, yeah, I'm going to vote for medical cannabis. I'm going to vote for adult use. And then I show up in your town and say, hey, I'm going to put a dispensary on Main Street. And then you think about it a little bit differently. And so, we've seen that play out in Massachusetts and other markets that, the regulators want to go slow. They want to get it right. They want to make sure that the local jurisdictions have a lot of control, and they've done that. And so that all takes time.
Okay.
And,
so how do you, like, when you guys have your local government affairs people go into communities and educate, how do they do that? How do they educate? So let me rephrase it to this way. How do you educate a community that you're looking to cite whether it be a grow, a processing facility, or a dispensary? How do you educate the local elected officials and the local community as to the reality of what the cannabis industry is like?
Yeah, I think education, as you point out, is the key to the whole topic. And so when you go into a community, certainly this is the first time they're contemplating having a dispensary in their town, right? So first you have to explain to them what cannabis is and what it isn't and what the law requires. And I think there's, a lot of people that, are, I would say, naturally skeptical about the topic, or maybe are concerned about having a dispensary in their town. And so you have to basically explain to them what the industry is, how it's going to be regulated. You have to, demonstrate that, this is not going to be pointed towards minors. So everybody has to be over 21. They have to have an ID, and it's, highly regulated. And I think when you have that conversation with people, they start to understand what it's all about. And, sometimes they get comfortable with it. Sometimes they don't. But if you look at a state like Massachusetts, for example, so 50% of the towns are going to allow it, and 50% are not. They've
and the 50 that don't, they're going to lose that tax revenue.
That's right. So, but I mean, that tells you that there's a lot of work to do, and it's definitely still something that's, certainly controversial, and I think will take time to, be weaved into the fabric of society.
So, the history of your company, Palliatech, it's around palliative care, and Curaleaf, I know, is really focused on the medical side of the business. And while you're going to operate in adult use states, medical is integrated into your DNA. How do you go about patient education? How do you go about educating people as to the real medical value of the plant?
Right. So certainly medical is a huge piece of our DNA. We have a medical advisory board that's chaired by Dr. Steve Paterno, the deputy director of the Duke Cancer Center. And we have some brilliant doctors that advise us on that side of the business. And we have a team of cannabis chemists that are constantly thinking about formulations that help address diseases and help people manage conditions through cannabis. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that, and that's a big piece of our business. And from our point of view, we know that anecdotally cannabis has massive medicinal benefits. We serviced 33,000 unique patients last month, and that's something I'm incredibly proud of. And so from that point of view, we are absolutely certain that cannabis has medicinal benefits, but we need to do more research. And unfortunately, there's still a federal prohibition against research in the United States. And so we've ceded that to the rest of the world. There's amazing research happening all over the globe, in Israel and Germany and Canada, and we need that research to be done in the U.S. And so that's one of the things that we're working on in D.C. is to lobby for the federal government to pass a law that enables well, it's not really the States Act. It's so Representative Matt Gaetz out of Florida has a bill that's that's working its way through Congress that will allow for the research of cannabis in the U.S. And we think that's an important piece of legislation that has to happen. As I said, there are millions of people across this country that are using cannabis for medical conditions, and I'm absolutely certain that if we're allowed to do the science in the U.S., we'll demonstrate that the cannabinoids in this plant have medicinal benefits, and so that's a big piece of what we think about as a company.
So you mentioned the federal illegality, and there's this odd structure, right? You had this national prohibition about research and development, and you can't ship plants across state lines. But you're a vertically integrated multi-state operator. You have 30 plus stores under the Curaleaf name, and you said 200 plus SKUs that are all Curaleaf. So how do you build a national brand when you can't ship stuff across state lines?
Not easily. Not easily. It's state by state. So, I mean, we are a multi-state operator, but the reality is it's a state by state business. And so in every state, we have a local management team. We have a cultivation center, a manufacturing suite. We have dispensaries, and it's vertical within that state. As you point out, nothing can cross state lines. We have to be fully compliant with all state regs, and state regs vary state by state. And so that certainly makes the compliance function challenging and makes a lot of what we do challenging, but we're committed to continuing to unfold our brand state by state, and that won't change until there's a full rescheduling of cannabis, and so we don't think that's really in the short horizon, and so we'll continue to be a state by state operator, but our brand will exist in all those markets.
So let's go back to the raise for a minute, because you raised a fuck ton of money. I mean, $400 million is a lot of money. And you had mentioned M&A and investment. And then you also mentioned how we have seeded real R&D internationally. Would you ever think of applying some of that money to support international research? Or I know where are you going to spend it? You're going to buy any PR firms?
No, we're going to be very disciplined in how we spend our money, in that we're very focused on the U.S. We're not going to be distracted at the moment by international markets. We're going to continue to be a U.S. operator. We are going to continue to invest in, our own infrastructure, but also making acquisitions where we can be the controlling shareholder and make sure that we can be a Curaleaf run business. And so we'll continue to do that. And from a research perspective, I want to highlight that we are. There's one state in the country that has a very unique law. It's the state of Pennsylvania, where they have a clinical registrant program where the 8 medical schools in the state can partner with cannabis companies to do research in cannabis. And so we are partners with a medical school in Pennsylvania, and we intend to enter that state hopefully in Q1, and we'll start to do research.
Q1 of 2019.
Q1 of 2019, and we'll start to do research in Pennsylvania, and we think that we've got some really promising research studies teed up. One is in the area of pediatric neurological disorders, which is showing huge promise. There's many children across the country that are using cannabis for Dravet syndrome and epilepsy, and so we think that's exciting. And we're going to do another study with cannabis for pain with cancer patients. And so we're going to do whatever we can to advance the industry on the medical front, and we may not. This will take time, and it will be slow progress, unfortunately. But we're committed to making sure we do research and demonstrate that cannabis has its legitimate space in the medical field.
So you're the CEO of one of the biggest cannabis companies in the world. So what is your personal relationship with the plant?
To be very candid, I'm not a real heavy cannabis user. It's really not my thing. But what I would say is that, certainly.
So if I went, you would be like, I'm good.
Yeah. Well, I got to operate a company. And so,
it's early in the morning.
It's early in the morning. So I tend to stay focused. But, from my perspective, I think that, certainly if you're someone that has a serious medical condition, you should, look at cannabis as a potentially viable option for that. And, on an adult use perspective, I think there's a lot of people that, relax with a glass of wine that may consider cannabis as a viable alternative. And I certainly, if you're in a state that allows it, I encourage you to try it and see if it's your thing. And so, I think that.
Well, make sure you buy it from a Curaleaf dispensary.
Yeah, exactly. But, I think that what's going to happen is that cannabis is going to become more mainstream over time. What you're going to see is that, really the early days of adult use has been geared towards the real cannabis enthusiasts and people that I would say are, probably heavier users. But I think what you're going to see over time is that, soccer moms, soccer dads, baby boomers are going to start looking at cannabis and seeing it as a potential interesting alternative to possibly beer or wine or other things they use to relax.
Which is why Constellation supposedly invested in Canopy, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think what you're also going to see is that the form factor is changing, and so you're getting away from flower. You are getting into more manufactured products on the adult use side too, and also low THC products. And so you're starting to see beverages with 5 milligrams of THC or 10 milligrams, and those products aren't intended to get you ultra stoned. They're intended to maybe take the edge off and help you relax or change your mood state. And I think that's where the business is going to develop. You're going to see a lot more of those products come to market. Companies, as you point out, like Constellation will innovate in that arena. And I think cannabis will continue to become more mainstream over time.
So Florida is a really unique market, right? I mean, it's medical only, but it is probably the fastest growing medical market in the country. And you have a pretty big presence in Florida. Is there anything that my millions and millions of 2 or 3 fans in Florida should know about?
Yeah, no, Florida is a really exciting market for us. So the market's adding 3,000 to 5,000 patients a week some weeks. As you point out, it's the fastest growing medical market, we think, in the country. We have a license in Florida that allows us to be vertical and open up 35 dispensaries. And so we're fast on our way to doing that. We will open up our 14th dispensary hopefully this week in Florida.
Where?
North Miami. And we will continue to lay down a significant retail footprint throughout the state to create access to cannabis. And so that's a market that we're really excited about. We opened the first drive-through on the East Coast in Florida. That got a little bit of fanfare.
Where was that?
In Palm Harbor. And that got a little bit of fanfare. But, if you get,
is it like, do you have bud tenders on roller skates that come out to the car?
It's not quite that cool. But, the reality is it got a little bit of fanfare, but we're really proud of that because, a lot of these people have mobility challenges. We have people that, it's difficult just to get out of the car and walk into the store. And so that creates a new alternative way for people to get their medicine. They can come right to the drive-through and get their cannabis. And so it's very convenient.
Is it like the state liquor stores in like New Hampshire where you can drive through, and what's that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, so you have to make sure you have to order ahead and someone's there to basically, but it's really about mobility, and it's really just another way for people to get their medicine that are struggling, frankly, with, a disease. And so people have responded very positively to that concept.
So Massachusetts is in the process of changing over from medical to adult use. What do you think is going to happen to the medical patients who are in any of the states that convert from medical to adult use? Do they just get different product, or what's the functional
Well, it's really
difference?
interesting. I mean, what we've seen from other markets is that the medical patients still exist, but some of those people gravitate towards buying on the adult use program instead of the medical side. The products are, frankly, I don't want to say the same, but a lot of the products are similar. And what we have found is that if you think about a medical patient today, to be certified as a medical patient, you have to go to your doctor. But more importantly, for example, in Massachusetts, you have to go be on a state registry. And I think a lot of people are not necessarily comfortable with the concept of the government tracking their cannabis use. And so I suspect that when there's an adult use program, you might start seeing people that are still, sick, that still want to manage their condition with cannabis. But I suspect some of those people will gravitate towards the adult use side of the business because they have a healthy skepticism of the government tracking their use.
Just I want to stay on this, and then I'll have one more question because I know you have to run. But you guys have a deeply consultative experience for a medical patient that comes into a dispensary now. Is that the same for when a patient comes in as an adult use, or is it just more like a transactional experience?
I mean, no, I think you're right. So certainly one thing that sets us apart, we think, is that we have our format is highly educational. And so when a medical patient walks in, they generally get a 20 to 30 minute consultation so they can learn about cannabis for the first time. And then even upon return visits, we spend a lot of time educating patients on the products, the form factors, how they're using it for their condition. And so that's a big hallmark of the experience today. On the adult use side, I suspect, it will be possibly a little bit more transactional, but the reality is today we're a medical business. We're only moving into the adult use
You're
markets.
like 90-something %.
98% medical. So a lot of this is theoretical at the moment, but we think if once we're in the adult use side of the business, we will continue to provide an experience where people can learn about cannabis. If you look at the Curaleaf experience today, it's really about accessibility and education, and that will, I think, continue on the adult use side as well. We want to make sure that we have a format where anybody can walk in and feel comfortable and learn about cannabis in a very I would say non-intimidating setting.
So this is it. You're almost done, and then you can get out. I promise it's not going to be painful. But we have a segment called While You Were Sleeping.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of news regularly about cannabis that's out there. But if there was one story that you wish the Boston Globe or the New York Times or the Wall Street was covering about the industry that they're not, what should we all be paying attention to? What are we all missing?
Well, for me, I think what's important is that people talk, and I do too. I mean, people talk about the size of the cannabis industry, but there's not enough attention paid to the ancillary and the ripple effect of this industry. This is a massive jobs creator in this country. So, the industry itself was $11 billion, this year, but I would say by any estimate, it's 2 to 3 times that when you think about all the various trades that are involved. So HVAC, electrical, plumbing, accounting, tax, legal. This is a big jobs creator. And I think that, these are American jobs and these are jobs with benefits. And so, I think more attention needs to be paid to the fact that this is an economic engine that we're creating here. And I think that it has a lot of value to the communities in which we operate in. We have, like I said, we're going to put $80 million of just infrastructure investment capital to work in our company alone this year. And that's going to create a lot of jobs. And so that's something that I think more people need to talk about and recognize.
And a special thanks to Joe Lusardi, CEO of Curaleaf. They are trading on the Canadian Securities Exchange, or the CSE, under the ticker. Well, I'm just going to keep rolling. So it's under the ticker, CURA. And to find out more about them, visit www.curaleaf.com, or you can follow them on Twitter at Curaleaf_Inc. And as always, if you want to chat with us, send me some hate mail, some love mail, any mail, I'll take it. You can find us on Instagram or Twitter with the handle at KCSA_cannabis, or you can drop us an email at greenrush@kcsa.com. And don't forget to subscribe to The Green Rush in your favorite podcatcher. Share this so that we can have others listen to us. And as always, that's one take, Shay. One take.